Welcome back to Rapture Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Rain slid down the tall glass walls of Vale Dynamics like slow-moving tears, distorting the skyline beyond until the city looked as if it were melting into the night. Inside the executive boardroom, Dominic Vale stood at the head of a table carved from a single slab of black walnut, his posture effortless yet commanding. Men twice his age waited for him to speak, their expensive suits rustling whenever they shifted under the pressure of his silence. Dominic had built his empire with a precision that left no room for sentiment. Numbers obeyed him. Markets bent toward him. Competitors learned quickly that he did not bluff. "Delay the launch," he finally said, his voice low but absolute. "If the braking algorithm isn't flawless, we don't release it. I won't sell a machine that guesses when a human life is at stake." A murmur of reluctant agreement circled the table. Across from him sat Victor Hale, his cousin, whose polite smile never reached his calculating eyes. Victor tapped a pen lightly against his tablet. "You've already invested nearly 200 million, Victor said smoothly. "Investors are growing restless." Dominic didn't sit. He simply looked at Victor until the pen stopped tapping. Restless investors are preferable to dead customers. The meeting ended shortly after, but the tension lingered in the air like static before a storm. As executives filed out, Marissa Chen stepped forward, handing Dominic his schedule. Her efficiency was almost surgical. "You have the regulatory dinner tonight," she reminded him. "Cancel it. You've cancelled twice. Then they should be used to disappointment." Marissa studied him for a moment. She was one of the few people who dared to. "You haven't taken a day off in 11 months. Dominic picked up his coat. "Work functions better than rest." He didn't say what Marissa already suspected, that rest left too much space for thoughts he preferred not to entertain. Outside, the rain thickened into a metallic hiss against the pavement as Dominic drove himself home instead of using a chauffeur. Control mattered, even in small things. Halfway across the Whitmore Bridge, a violent shudder ripped through the steering column. Warning lights flared crimson across the dashboard. Dominic guided the car to the shoulder with practiced calm, though irritation simmered beneath it. Machines were not supposed to fail him. After a brief inspection under the cold drizzle, he made a rare decision. He would not call Vale roadside support. Instead, he searched the nearest garage and found a modest listing, Riverside Garage, still open. The building crouched between a laundromat and a shuttered bakery, its sign buzzing faintly. Inside, the smell of engine oil and heated metal replaced the sterile scent of corporate spaces Dominic knew too well. Sparks leapt from a welding torch somewhere deeper in the shop. Then he heard a voice. "Try turning it over now." It was firm, confident, and unmistakably female. The engine roared back to life on a lifted pickup. From beneath it slid a woman on a mechanic's creeper, wiping grease from her hands with a rag already stained beyond redemption. When she stood, Dominic noticed two things immediately. Her posture carried the steady assurance of someone who trusted her own skill, and despite the smudges along her jaw, she was striking. Elena Marlowe did not look surprised to see a man in a tailored coat standing in her garage at nearly midnight. "You look like you drove something expensive into a problem," she said. "My car stalled." She gestured toward an empty bay. "Pull it in." There was no recognition in her tone, no flutter of intimidation, no attempt to impress him. To her, he was simply another driver with a broken machine. As she examined the vehicle, Dominic watched her movements, efficient, unhurried, exact. She listened to the engine as though it was speaking a language only she understood. "Faulty sensor," she diagnosed within minutes. "Not catastrophic, but you shouldn't have kept driving it. You figured that out quickly." She shrugged. "Machines talk. Most people just don't listen." Dominic almost smiled. While she worked, thunder rolled faintly overhead. A teenage boy sat at a cluttered desk nearby, textbooks open beside a half-eaten sandwich. "My brother, Caleb," Elena explained without looking up. "Engineering student. Thinks he's smarter than me because he knows more equations." Caleb grinned. "She refuses to admit torque calculations matter." "They matter," Elena replied, tightening a component. But experience matters more. Dominic felt something unfamiliar stirring, not attraction yet, but curiosity sharpened by respect. When she handed him the invoice, he noticed the price was modest, far below what the repair deserved. "You undercharge," he said. "I charge what's fair." He paid without argument. As Dominic drove away, he found himself glancing once in the rearview mirror. Elena was already back under another vehicle, wholly absorbed in the rhythm of her craft. For reasons he did not examine too closely, the image lingered. Morning arrived with sharp sunlight cutting through the city's financial district. Dominic resumed command of his world as if the night detour had never occurred. Yet during a product review, he caught himself recalling the mechanic's certainty, the way she trusted her instincts without hesitation. Elsewhere, Elena started her day before dawn. Riverside Garage belonged to Arthur Doyle, a retired race engineer whose knees had surrendered before his mind did. He watched Elena recalibrate a transmission with quiet pride. "You ever think of leaving this place?" Arthur asked. "Every day," she replied lightly. "And every day I decide not yet." Her dream was precise. One day she would open a training garage for girls who had been told their hands were better suited to softer work. She saved aggressively, lived simply, and refused shortcuts. By noon, Trouble arrived wearing designer sunglasses. Serafina Laurent stepped out of a pearl-colored coupe, surveying the garage as though it might stain her shoes. "I need this fixed immediately," she announced. Elena inspected the vehicle. "It'll take a few hours. I have a charity gala." "Then you should have noticed the grinding noise sooner." Serafina's lips tightened. She wasn't accustomed to resistance. When Dominic entered the same gala that evening, Serafina greeted him with practiced warmth, looping her arm through his. "You work too much," she purred. "You need someone to remind you life is meant to be enjoyed." Dominic extricated himself gently. "Enjoyment is subjective." Their conversation was interrupted by Victor, who leaned close. "You should consider alliances more carefully," Victor murmured. "Personal ones can stabilize public perception." Dominic understood the subtext: marriage, optics, control. He ignored it. Days later, fate accelerated. A violent multi-car collision blocked Harbor Avenue just as Elena was driving home. Without hesitation, she pulled over, sprinting toward the wreckage. Smoke curled from a crushed sedan. A child cried somewhere inside. "Help me pry this open," she shouted to a stunned bystander. Her hands trembled only once, after the door gave way and the trapped driver gasped for air. Traffic cameras captured everything. By morning, the footage had spread across every major network. Unknown mechanic saves family. Marissa placed the clip on Dominic's desk. "You should see this." Recognition struck instantly. "Find her," he said. Not for publicity. Not even for gratitude. For reasons he could not yet name. Meanwhile, Victor studied the same footage with narrowed eyes. Opportunity often wore unexpected faces. "If Dominic takes interest," he muttered to an associate, "we learn everything about her." Suspicion had become his native language. When Dominic returned to Riverside Garage, Elena looked faintly annoyed rather than flattered. "You're the man with the sensor problem," she said. "And you're the woman who runs toward burning cars." It needed doing. He surprised himself then. "My company is developing safer vehicle systems. I'd like your perspective." She blinked. "You want a mechanic's opinion." "I want the opinion of someone who understands consequences." Something shifted between them, subtle, electric. Neither called it attraction. Not yet. But as Dominic left the garage that afternoon, one realization settled with quiet certainty. For the first time in years, something, or someone, had entered his carefully controlled world without permission. And he wasn't sure he wanted the door closed. Dominic did not return to Riverside Garage immediately. Instead, he sent Marissa first, not with contracts, not with cameras, but with quiet observation. Marissa arrived mid-morning in a modest sedan, dressed down deliberately. She watched Elena recalibrate a hybrid battery module with a precision that rivaled Vale's own engineers. When Marissa introduced herself simply as a representative of a vehicle safety firm, Elena did not flinch. "You're not here for publicity?" Elena asked, tightening a terminal. "No." "Good. I don't like being turned into a headline." Marissa respected that answer. When she reported back, Dominic listened carefully. "She doesn't exaggerate," Marissa said. "She downplays everything." Dominic stared at the skyline beyond his office windows. "Invite her to a closed technical review. No press." The invitation surprised Elena more than the gala headlines ever had. Caleb nearly dropped his textbook when she told him. "You're going into a corporate lab," he said, eyes wide. "I'm just giving an opinion," she replied, though her pulse suggested otherwise. Arthur Doyle folded his arms. "If they try to use you for optics, walk." "I will." The following week, Elena stepped into Vale Dynamics' Restricted Research Division, a cavernous space of white floors and suspended robotic arms assembling prototype chassis. Engineers paused when they saw grease-stained boots against polished tile. Dominic approached without entourage. "I'm glad you came," he said. "Show me what fails first," she replied. There was no small talk. They tested a collision simulation module together. Elena noticed a fractional delay in the auto-braking recalibration. "It hesitates," she said. "It shouldn't," Dominic responded. "It does. Half a second could cost someone." Dominic turned to his lead engineer. "Fix it." For the first time in years, someone challenged him not for power, but for safety. That night, Elena returned home to find a black SUV idling across the street. It drove off when she looked directly at it. She told herself it meant nothing. It didn't. Victor Hale reviewed internal access logs with quiet intensity. "She was granted full simulation clearance?" he asked. "Yes," replied a junior analyst nervously. Victor's jaw tightened. "Monitor her communications." He wasn't concerned about Elena's competence. He was concerned about Dominic's interest. Across town, Serafina Laurent attended a private luncheon where Vale investors whispered about Dominic's recent mechanic obsession. The word irritated her. "He prefers brilliance," she said coolly. "It's refreshing." But privately, she scheduled a visit to Riverside Garage. When Serafina arrived, she did not hide her identity. Cameras followed discreetly at a distance. "Elena Marlowe," she said, removing her sunglasses. "Yes." "You've been spending time with Dominic Vale." "I've been reviewing braking systems." Serafina's smile sharpened. "Be careful not to confuse professional proximity with personal possibility." Elena wiped her hands slowly. "You're confusing me with someone who competes." Serafina left with a tight expression. Later that evening, Dominic received a message from Graham Whitmore, an investigative journalist known for dismantling corporate myths. "We need to talk. About your new consultant." Dominic agreed to meet. The restaurant was dimly lit, discreet. Graham wasted no time. "You've avoided scandal for years," Graham said. "But sudden attachments create narratives." "She's not an attachment," Dominic replied. "Then what is she?" Dominic paused, longer than intended. "She's necessary." Graham studied him. "Be certain your enemies don't see her as leverage." The next escalation came without warning. During a closed-track vehicle test in the Nevada Desert facility, a prototype steering system locked mid-run. Elena was in the passenger seat beside a senior test driver. The car veered toward the barrier at impossible speed. "Override," the driver shouted. "It's not responding." Elena slammed her hand against the manual release. At the final second, she forced a mechanical disengage Arthur had once insisted every system retain. The vehicle skidded sideways, stopping inches from reinforced steel. Silence swallowed the track. Dominic arrived moments later, having watched the live feed. "You could have died," he said quietly. "You almost removed the one backup that saved us," she answered. His engineers stood frozen. Dominic's gaze hardened. "Find the breach." Victor, watching remotely, muted the audio. This was not an accident. Security audits revealed someone had tampered with the override redundancy. Subtle. Almost invisible. Dominic convened a private review. Internal sabotage, he said calmly. No one leaves this company until we know who. Elena felt the weight of the room shift toward suspicion, and briefly toward her. She met Dominic's eyes. If you think it's me, say it. He stepped closer. If I thought it was you, you wouldn't be standing here. The words carried more meaning than intended. That night, Elena found the black SUV again outside her apartment. This time it didn't drive away. She approached it directly. The window rolled down. Victor Hale smiled faintly from inside. You're braver than most, he said. I don't like being followed. Then don't give people reasons to follow you. His tone was silk over steel. Inside Veil Dynamics, Dominic reviewed forensic results. The tampering traced to a high-level clearance key, one only executives possessed. He leaned back slowly. Trust had just become dangerous again. I'm being pulled somewhere I didn't plan to go. Arthur nodded. Sometimes that's how new beginnings look. Meanwhile, Dominic confronted Victor privately. Victor didn't deny it. I was evaluating. Without notifying safety leads. Elena considered walking away. The risk was escalating. The attention felt invasive. Caleb noticed her restlessness. You're not scared, he said. No. What are you, then? Angry. Arthur called her into the office the next morning. You're changing, he observed. You accessed the test system last week, Dominic said evenly. You're letting a mechanic influence billion-dollar decisions. She saved your investment. Victor's smile faded. Careful, Dominic. Attachment clouds judgment. Sabotage clouds loyalty. Their stare held. War had begun, not openly, but undeniably. The turning point arrived at Vail's annual Innovation Summit, a closed, high-level gathering of regulators and investors. Dominic shocked the board by inviting Elena as a guest of honor, not as decoration but as a technical contributor. Whispers filled the hall. Elena wore a simple black dress, uncomfortable but composed. When asked about the desert incident, she spoke plainly. Machines fail when pride ignores precaution. The statement landed heavier than applause. Dominic watched her under chandelier light and understood something quietly, irreversibly. It wasn't admiration alone anymore. It wasn't curiosity. When a minor electrical fire broke out backstage due to overloaded equipment, Elena reacted before security did, cutting power at the correct junction and preventing a larger disaster. Dominic reached her seconds later. You run toward chaos, he said. Someone has to. He looked at her differently then, not as a consultant, not as a headline, not as leverage, but as someone who steadied him. And in that charged, smoke-tinged corridor, surrounded by fading alarm lights and murmuring executives, Dominic Vail realized the truth he had been resisting. He was no longer protecting a valuable ally. He was protecting the woman he had fallen in love with. And that realization, in a world built on control, terrified him more than sabotage ever could. Dominic slept very little after the summit. Awareness had changed the geometry of his thoughts. Every decision now bent subtly toward Elena, whether he intended it or not. He compensated the only way he knew how, by tightening security across every layer of Veil Dynamics. Access protocols were rewritten overnight, surveillance audits doubled, and an external cybersecurity firm was brought in without announcement. When Marissa asked if the escalation was tied to the sabotage, Dominic answered truthfully but not completely. It's tied to exposure, he said. He did not add that love, once discovered, created exposure of the most dangerous kind. Elena, meanwhile, returned to Riverside expecting relief in routine, yet routine had already abandoned her. Reporters lingered at corners, anonymous calls clicked dead when she answered, even suppliers seemed suddenly curious. Arthur Doyle noticed first. Pressure tests reveal structural integrity, he muttered as he watched her talk a cylinder head with steady hands. You're holding. She was, outwardly. Inwardly, she debated distance. That debate ended the afternoon. Dominic walked into the garage without warning, removed his jacket, and helped her steady a transmission housing as if it were the most natural act in the world. No cameras. No announcement. Just presence. "You don't belong under cars," she said quietly. "Today I do," he replied. The simplicity of it unsettled her more than grand gestures could have. Across town, Victor reviewed new intelligence with cold satisfaction. Elena had become Dominic's pattern. Patterns could be broken. He authorized a private acquisitions team to purchase the blocks surrounding Riverside through layered shell companies, a silent siege designed to displace without confrontation. Graham Whitmore caught the land transfers before filings finalized. He requested a meeting with Elena instead of publishing immediately. "Someone is engineering pressure around you," he told her. "Why warn me?" she asked. Graham held her gaze. "Because whatever this becomes, it shouldn't begin with you blindsided." That night, Elena walked the perimeter of the garage, understanding for the first time that survival might require stepping forward rather than stepping back. Dominic made the decision hours later. He asked her to join Vale Dynamics formally as Director of Mechanical Integrity, a role created overnight with authority broad enough to matter. She accepted on one condition: Riverside would not be abandoned. Dominic bought the property anonymously and placed it in a preservation trust before sunrise. War preferred darkness. He intended to master it. Elena's first weeks inside Vale rewired the culture faster than policy ever could. She rejected executive parking, ate in the engineer commons, and learned names instead of titles. When a junior technician hesitated to report a microfracture in a prototype axle, fearing delay penalties, Elena halted the entire test cycle and praised him publicly. "Integrity is speed," she told the stunned room. Productivity rose afterward, not from fear, but from permission to be precise. Dominic watched the ripple effects with something close to pride. He invited her to strategy reviews normally sealed from operational staff. Her questions cut through abstraction with mechanical clarity. Late one evening, as they reviewed a chassis redesign alone, a citywide storm severed power. Emergency lighting bathed the lab in amber. Silence deepened until it felt almost intentional. Dominic poured 2 coffees from a thermos Marissa had long ago learned to stock for crises. "Why machines?" he asked. Elena considered before answering. "Because they tell the truth when humans don't. Stress them, and they reveal exactly where they'll break." He nodded slowly. "People do too, eventually." Thunder rolled. Neither moved away. It was Elena who closed the distance by a single, decisive step. Dominic did not reach for her immediately. He gave her the choice twice in the space of a breath. When she rested her forehead briefly against his shoulder, the restraint dissolved. The kiss that followed was not dramatic. It was inevitable, like a lock aligning with its key. Neither spoke afterward. They simply stood there, recalibrated. The next morning, Serafina requested a private audience with Dominic and left with clarity she had not wanted. "You're choosing unpredictability," she said. "I'm choosing truth," he answered. She pivoted gracefully, but her family's investment arm withdrew a pending partnership within days, the first external tremor. Victor amplified it quietly, feeding analysts the narrative that Dominic's judgment had softened. Stock dipped 3 points. Dominic didn't flinch. He bought the dip himself, a signal understood by anyone fluent in markets. Conviction, not panic. Caleb Marlowe's acceptance into the prestigious Halcyon Engineering Fellowship should have been uncomplicated joy. Instead, the congratulatory letter was followed by a secondary note requesting financial verification, an unusual addendum for a merit award. Graham traced the anomaly to a donor advisory panel newly influenced by a Hale affiliate. Elena refused to ask Dominic for intervention. Dominic intervened anyway, but indirectly, endowing an anonymous scholarship fund that rendered the verification moot. Caleb never knew. He only knew the path remained open. Victor, realizing the maneuver too late, escalated. He authorized a smear seeded through niche financial forums implying Elena had manipulated safety data to accelerate her rise. The rumor metastasized with algorithmic efficiency until a regulatory subcommittee requested testimony. Elena walked into the hearing room composed, carrying nothing but schematics and timestamps. When questioned, she didn't defend herself rhetorically. She reconstructed the engineering timeline minute by minute until the allegation collapsed under its own incoherence. One regulator leaned toward another and whispered, not quietly enough, "We should be asking how she prevented a disaster, not entertaining fiction." Outside, Dominic waited without entourage. "You didn't need me," he said. "I needed myself," she replied, then allowed her hand to find his. Victor watched the broadcast replay in silence. If reputational erosion failed, operational shock would not. He turned to a logistics consultant with a history of deniable catastrophes. "Delay their flagship rollout," he said. "Not visibly. Make it look like the world interfered." Weeks later, Vale prepared to unveil its safest autonomous platform yet. The launch route wound through a mountain pass chosen specifically to demonstrate adaptive control under variable conditions. Hours before the convoy departed, an unseasonal rockslide buried a service road and severed a fiber relay, a coincidence too neat for Dominic's instincts. Elena rerouted the test using satellite redundancy she had insisted on installing after the desert incident. Mid-descent, a secondary slide thundered down, forcing the lead vehicle into manual navigation through debris. Elena, monitoring telemetry beside Dominic, identified a harmonic oscillation building in the rear suspension, invisible to standard alerts. "Reduce torque now," she ordered. The driver complied. The oscillation dampened just as the car cleared the hazard. Later analysis showed the slide had been triggered by microcharges drilled into fault lines. Professional, patient, malicious. Dominic authorized a forensic task force with quiet jurisdiction. Graham received fragments and began assembling a story larger than any single company. Infrastructure manipulation, shell acquisitions, donor influence, a constellation pointing toward strategy rather than impulse. He asked Victor for comment. Victor declined with a smile practiced for decades. That evening, Dominic stood on Elena's apartment balcony, city lights flickering below like coded messages. "This doesn't end with slides," he said. "It ends when the architecture behind them is exposed." Elena studied him. "Then expose it, but don't become it." He understood. Victory without resemblance to the enemy. Elena proposed something audacious next, an open safety initiative inviting independent mechanics, engineers, and even competitors to stress-test Vale systems publicly. The board recoiled at the transparency. Dominic overruled them. "Trust scales faster than secrecy," he said. The event drew global attention. Among the attendees was Arthur Doyle, walking with a cane he refused to admit he needed. He watched Elena command the floor with grounded authority and felt a quiet completion. During a live diagnostic, a remote intrusion attempted to corrupt the demonstration feed. Marissa isolated the vector within seconds. Elena continued speaking without acknowledging the attack, turning potential spectacle into proof of resilience. Markets responded with rare unanimity. Vale shares surged past prior resistance, erasing months of engineered doubt. Victor's leverage thinned. He accelerated his final instrument, a forged document implying Dominic had concealed a material defect years earlier. Graham received it simultaneously with regulators, and noticed the signature compression artifact he had seen once before on a hail-controlled filing. He published not the accusation, but the forgery, tracing its lineage with surgical clarity. By dawn, investigators were at Victor's townhouse with warrants broad enough to end dynasties. Victor attempted composure. Handcuffs are indifferent to composure. As he was led away, he met Dominic's gaze across the hedged drive. No words passed, only the exhausted recognition that wars rarely announce their last battle. Dominic declined the spectacle of a press conference. Instead, he stood beside Elena at Riverside, where the Preservation Trust plaque had been quietly mounted weeks earlier. Caleb prepared for Halcyon. Arthur agreed, after theatrical protest, to head a training program funded jointly by the New Vale, Marlow Mechanical Institute, a place where skill outranked pedigree. Graham's series went on to win awards he pretended not to care about. Serafina redirected her formidable intelligence into ventures that built rather than postured. She sent Elena a single note: strength recognizes strength. On a clear morning that felt almost deliberately gentle, Dominic asked Elena to walk with him through the Institute's unfinished bays. Sunlight spilled across concrete, sketching the outlines of futures not yet occupied. "You changed the way I measure success," he said. "It used to be scale. Now it's consequence. Elena smiled. Good machines do both. He drew a small box from his coat, unadorned, precise. Marry me, Elena Marlowe. Not because the world expects symmetry, but because every system in my life stabilizes when you're in it. She laughed once, softly, the sound of tension finally released. Only if we keep building things that keep people alive. Only, he agreed. When she said yes, it felt less like a beginning than an alignment long underway. Months later, their wedding unfolded on a coastal bluff without excess, engineers beside mechanics, regulators beside students, Arthur giving a speech he swore he wouldn't give and Caleb pretending not to be moved. As dusk gathered, Elena rested her head briefly against Dominic's shoulder, the same quiet gesture that had rewritten a stormlit lab. Empires would continue to test them. Markets would rise and fracture. The future would, as always, demand courage. But the architecture they had chosen together, integrity, transparency, relentless care for human life, was designed to hold under stress. And in that shared design lay the true answer to what happened when a billionaire fell in love with a poor, beautiful mechanic. The distance between their worlds did not vanish. It was engineered into a bridge strong enough for countless others to cross. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.